Turkey against its Kurdish minority. Ankara stands accused of using disproportionate violence in its crackdown on the Kurds. This only a few years after political engagement and as more Kurds are entering parliament. Why the about face? And will the Turkish government and the Kurds ever find a way to interact without violence? This is Inside Story. Hello everyone, I'm Kamahl Santamaria. Just a few months ago, Turkish Kurds had hoped for a political solution to their long-standing disagreements with the government in Ankara. They'd won seats in parliament, and later this week, the pro-Kurdish party, the HDP, had been due to meet with Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu. And then he cancelled. Davutoglu says it's because the HDP was promoting polarization by meeting the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov last week. Its leader, Selahattin Demirtas, went to Moscow and openly criticized the Turkish government for shooting down a Russian warplane. Ankara has accused Demirtas of, quote, treason for those comments. It was also reported as saying he wants to open a party office in Moscow at a time when Ankara's relationship with Russia is particularly tense, as we know. And as long as they're not talking, they're fighting, it seems. Turkish soldiers and police have launched a sweeping crackdown against Kurdish rebels in the southeast. Since it began last week, the offensive has killed nearly 200 PKK fighters, according to state media. However, Human Rights Watch says there have been more than 100 civilian casualties. Most of the fighting centers on the towns of Cizre, Diyarbakir and Sipoli. The offensive and the cancellation of the political leaders' meeting come at a time when the pro-Kurdish HDP party has actually achieved unprecedented political success. This year, for the first time, it was able to win 10% of the vote in an election. That takes it past the threshold for a place in parliament. The HDP widened its appeal to liberal voters by emphasizing things like minority and human rights. It also helped mediate the now defunct peace talks between the government and the PKK. So let's get the thoughts of our guests to discuss this subject today. Joining us from Istanbul, we have Galip Dalay, who is a research director at the Sharq Forum. In Diyarbakir, Ertugrul Kurkcu, who is an MP and the honorary president of the HDP, the People's Democratic Party. And also joining us from Istanbul via Skype is Berkay Mandiraci, who is a researcher on Turkey at the International Crisis Group. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. Let me read you something, first of all, that Prime Minister Davutoglu said. He said, HDP leaders have shown once again that they lack the political maturity to use politics as a means to solve problems. There's no point sitting around the same table, he says, with those who subscribe to such an ill-mannered approach. Ertugrul Kurkcu, seeing as you are from the HDP, let's get your view on that. If you go and start criticizing the government abroad to one of its enemies, you can only expect the government to react in a non-favorable way, surely.
Actually, I don't think that we have offended the personality of Ahmet Davutoglu in any sense, but we are an opposition party and our task is criticizing the government. And I don't think that we are criticizing the government from a personal point of view, but from the point of view of principles. Therefore, there's no harm in any case of criticizing a government. So the government should get used to criticisms. And the second thing about the visit by Selahattin Demirtas in Russia, this is also a right for every political party. We have the right to set up offices across the globe, anywhere we like, anywhere we need. And there's no need to doubt that we are plotting against the government, but we are, of course, criticizing the government, both at home and abroad. We hate hypocrisy. We speak plainly and openly and sincerely. And the day the Russian plane was downed, we said this was a very problematic approach, and we said that Turkey could refrain from downing the plane, and this is also admitted by the president and the prime minister.
Well, let me put it this way to you, Mr. Kurkcu. Let me put it this way to you. Sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, I don't disagree with you, because all the things you're saying are the things which happen in a democracy. The opposition criticises the government, challenges the government. That is what happens in a democracy. But you are also from a group which is trying to build bridges, which is trying to put behind them years, decades of conflict. Maybe this is the time to work even harder to build those bridges and to mend those fences.
This is something we have to take into consideration. However, all the debate has started when President Tayyip Erdogan annulled the results of the 7 June elections and pushed the country into a second round of elections, and which was seconded by a huge military operation against Kurdish towns and Kurdish politicians. Therefore, the table for solution, the table for a negotiation was already toppled by the president himself. So, yes, still we should work for reshaping the negotiations table. However, we are under attack, so we have to react if in a very civilized way, but we have to react. So this is the only way to balance the course of things. Then everything will become one-sided. We are going to be expected to obey the orders of the president.
Okay, so let's put some of this.
So
let's put some of this to Galip Dalay in Istanbul. Thank you. Let's put some of this to Galip Dalay in Istanbul. The HDP is doing what the opposition does, as we've heard quite rightly there, challenging a government, criticising a government. That's the way democracy works. I can understand why the government and the AK party might not like that, but also cancelling these talks doesn't help either. If we're going to get things moving along a road to peace and negotiations, cancelling talks doesn't help.
I personally think that cancelling of talk was not a very productive step. I think, even at a time when the tension runs high and when once again the arm defines the politics, it is important to open the channel for communication. But nevertheless, what just like my previous colleague has said, there is some problem with this. I think it is legitimate for any political party to set up its offices anywhere in the world. So there should not be any objection to this. The HDP is already having an office in Washington. It already does have another office in Brussels. So it can perfectly have an office in anywhere else. But nevertheless, the timing, something being legally correct does not mean it's politically correct. The timing is important, and especially at a time when one requirement of the peace process, the advancements of the peace process, is, as you correctly put it, the building bridges and cultivating the societal support for the Kurdish reconciliation processes. At a time when Turkey and Russia are at loggerheads and the diplomatic tension is running so high, going to Moscow and sending message from Moscow does not help to cultivate the public support for the Kurdish cause within Turkey. Because in the end, as the HDP prior to the June 7 election has rightly put it, the advancement and the solution of the Kurdish issue was supposed to be within the boundaries of Turkey and in cooperation with the wider Turkish society by bringing in democracy to Turkey. So in this regard, it is very much important that your action does not seen by the wider society as hostile towards the rest of society. So as I said, something being legally correct does not mean it's politically correct.
Okay, Berkay Mandiraci over in Istanbul on Skype. Let's bring you in as a researcher at the International Crisis Group, and based on what you've just heard our two guests say, what do you think? I know that's broad, but tell me where you sit after hearing those two gentlemen's views.
Well, I think I agree with both in different ways, I would say.
Okay.
Well, I mean, of course, it's a legitimate right for a party which is in the opposition to criticize the government's actions, also foreign policy actions, and also engage in other international affairs. However, as Mr. Dalay just said, the timing of this is quite critical, because at the moment, as you know, the southeast, the escalation, the violence is escalating in the southeast even further, and that's why the timing was quite critical. However, there was also another aspect to this, because, as you know, this PKK-Turkey conflict and in general the Kurdish conflict has been regionalized a lot, also with what is happening in Syria. And that's why there is also a broader strategy of the Kurdish movement in the region. And that's why the HDP tried to make moves on that front as well. And it's kind of also understandable in that sense, you know, that because of Russia's involvement in Syria, that HDP makes these broader contacts.
But can you even talk peace, or even talk about talking peace, when there is this violence going on? I know that the PKK is seen as separate, and it's seen as a terrorist organisation by Ankara and by many others as well, and the HDP is a political group in parliament, but we're all talking Kurds here, and as long as there's fighting against the PKK, how could you even really talk about peace talks, that is?
Well, of course, I mean, that is the main problem that needs to be the main obstacle at the moment that needs to be overcome. You cannot fight the PKK on the one hand and devise a strategy of reforms and make advancements on democratic rights reforms at the same time. This is a strategy that is not going to work. And I believe that the government is also aware of this. I mean, the Turkish state and the PKK have a long history of the conflict. They know each other very, very well, and they also both know that a military solution is not going to solve this issue. And that's why, I believe that the government in the end knows that the military strategy is not going to work out and not going to provide a long-term solution to the problem. But there are what is important is that the Kurdish movement also puts forward its demands clearly, and I think the Congress today of the Democratic People's Congress was an important step for the Kurdish movement to especially make its rights demands with regard to decentralization and autonomy clearer. This was something Crisis Group has been asking, or like putting in the reports for a long time as recommendations. And I think that is an important step. And now it's the government's turn actually to say, well, we know what the demands now are. They are clear, spoken out now, and the government now has a responsibility to actually see how it can make advancements in terms of decentralization, especially because that is the main Kurdish demand.
Right.
And without coming to an agreement on decentralization, it will not be able to solve the Kurdish issue.
Okay, well,
Solution.
Ertugrul, seeing as you are from a pro-Kurdish party, let me put it to you. How can these possibly, and I'm talking about the political side and then the PKK side, the violence that's going on there, how can they be seen as one? Because I think that's where Ankara will see the disconnect and say, well, we're fighting the PKK over here. It's a separate issue almost.
Actually, the situation in Turkey, or in terms of the Kurdish conflict, is more complex than it appears to be. First of all, there is not only one Kurdish problem. We have a Kurdish problem in Turkey, we have a Kurdish problem in Syria, we have a Kurdish problem in Iraq, and we have a Kurdish problem in Iran. And all these problems are mutually affected by each other. And for the time being, the Kurdish issue in Turkey is somehow intermingled with the Kurdish issue in Syria. And this is one of the reasons why the Turkish government is reacting against any Kurdish demand more strongly than it did in the past, because now we have another Kurdistan at the border of at the south border of Turkey. So this stimulates the age-old paranoia of disintegration or separation. This is a reason, and an irrational reason of Turkey's reaction. And the second thing is that the Turkish government has seen during the process of negotiations that the Kurdish problem in Turkey cannot be resolved unless the power and the hegemony is shared between Kurds locally and the Turks, both in the central government and in the localities. And I see that the Turkish government is yet unprepared for such a groundbreaking approach. This is contrarily against the heritage of Turkish statehood. Therefore, this is one of the reasons why Turkey retreats very quickly back from the negotiations table, and there they find the age-old foes of the Kurdish movement, the generals, the militarists, the ultra-nationalists, and now we have a block of all these. Not only the AKP is now launching the attacks against the Kurds. However, there is still space for a way out from this conflict, and this is one of the things that we have done today.
Okay.
We have clarified the demands about the autonomy, and we have put forth in front of the Turkish public that our issue is not separatism, but our issue is to gain age-old rights of Kurds, which will also gain the Turkish public in general broader democracy if they share the same opinion on the decentralization process.
Okay, let's put this to Galip. Dalay, I've been furiously writing some notes here because I want to put some of these things back to you. Ertugrul talks about things like rights of the Kurds, not separation or separatism. He says there's still space for a type of idea where the politics and what happens on the ground go together, if you talk about it. He talks about the Turkish government's irrational reactions. I mean, the picture that we're painting there, or that is being painted for us there, is that the the Kurds have got a very simple plan, and that it's the Turkish government that's fighting back against it, pushing back against it.
Well, I mean, like utilizing a quite democracy-friendly discourse does not mean that you utilize quite democracy-friendly means or the methods. Very simple questions. For sure, the Turkey should not have the breakup paranoia or the secessionist paranoia. But how can you convince the Turkish public to support the Kurdish advancement of the Kurdish rights, whereas right after the June 7 election, that you have the PKK once again starting the fighting and bring it to the urban centers, and right now putting almost 1.3 million Kurds in the southeast of Turkey living under the urban warfare conditions. So in which way are you talking about the advancement of democratic rights, whereas you, without consulting even your own constituency, whether asking for the democratic self-governance is a political demand, it's a legitimate demand, and I think Turkey is overly centralized, and I think Turkey does need decentralization. But however, doing this through laying siege to the towns, laying siege to the neighborhoods, laying siege to the villages, I don't think does portray a very democratic picture for the rest of the country, and very rational picture. And secondly, when we talk about the Kurdish issue is a quite complicated issue. It is for sure complicated issue, and it has for sure regional dimension, and unfortunately the government doesn't have a very viable regional Kurdish policy. But nevertheless, making all the advancement of the Kurdish peace process in Turkey as contingent upon what is going to happen in Syria seems to be quite illogical, because in the end we are living in a world made up of nation states, and our unit of operation is nation states. So Turkey cannot solve all the Kurdish issue in Syria, in Iran and Iraq, and then tackle with its own Kurdish issue. But what Turkey can do have a sustainable policies towards the Syrian Kurds. By which, what I mean, I think Turkey and the PYD, the main Syrian Kurdish political party, needs to have a mutual accommodation. This mutual accommodation should have two dimensions. One of them, Turkey needs to accommodate the gains of the PYD in Syria and does not make it the main problematic. And also, Turkey should press that this Syrian, the Kurdish region of Syria also is an inclusive one. That means that it's not going to be a PKK land, it's going to be a Kurdish autonomy
land.
because
Okay.
there we're mostly, exactly, it's PKK land. On the other hand, the PKK needs to basically terminate its Syria-like activities in Turkey because since Turkey is not Syria, basically treating the southeast as continuation of the Syria is illogical to start at the first place.
Right, let me stop you right there because all three, I know we could carry on this topic for a while, but all three of you have mentioned the Kurds elsewhere, the Iraqi Kurds, the Syrian Kurds. Now, I'm reading something here which our third guest, Berkay Mandiraci, actually wrote in an international crisis group paper, and he says, and why don't I put this to you, Berkay, you said that violence between the PKK and the Turkish state actually benefits ISIL, or Islamic State, as some people call it. Can you explain briefly how that works?
Well, as you know, there were IS-linked attacks in Turkey in the inter-election period. One in Suruç. I mean, there were two at least that were like major ones, and there were also other smaller ones. One in Suruç and the other one in Ankara on 10 October. And those were IS-linked attacks. I mean, the exact networks and patterns behind those attacks hasn't been revealed yet. Investigations are still continuing. And it's important, I think, for Turkey to actually go forward with those investigations. But at that time, I mean, the divide between the Kurdish communities and the Turkish communities in Turkey, and especially also between the current government and the Kurdish movement, is definitely playing into the hands of IS because driving a wedge between those communities which have been in conflict for so many years already and igniting that violence again is for once making the Kurdish movement much weaker on its fronts in Iraq and Syria because, you know, YPG and HPG are also fighting against IS in Syria. And on the other hand, of course, this will destabilize Turkey, and Turkey, as you know, has jumped on board with the coalition against IS, the US-led coalition against IS. So destabilizing Turkey in that sense and making Turkey's foreign policy focused so much on what the PYD does, for example, or so much on what happened with the Kurds in the region, is also playing into the hands of IS because it makes Turkey's wiggle room in Syria, also against IS, much smaller, and it's very difficult for Turkey actually to make turns in its foreign policy because it is conditioning everything so much on what happens to the Kurds in Syria and also in the Kurdish region.
Very brief final thoughts then, because we're just running out of time. Ertugrul Kurkcu in Diyarbakir, what we've just heard from Berkay is reason enough, isn't it, to really try to sort or get things moving on the Kurdish front, because the last thing you want is for ISIL to benefit from any of this.
Yes, of course, it's obvious, everybody knows that the major force on land in Syria against ISIL is the YPG guerrillas and the PYD as a political force. So therefore it's without doubt that the common enemy for both Turkey, if Turkey is against ISIL, and for the Kurds is the ISIL. So there should be cooperation instead of conflict between the Kurdish movement and Turkey. This is why I call Turkish reactions a bit irrational, because a rational approach should try to ease the conflict in Turkey in order to gain ground against ISIL in Syria. However, there are very many doubts that Turkey is rather more deeply involved with the ISIL and other jihadist movements as a counterbalancing force against the Assad regime. Therefore, their acts are not as determined as it is expected.
Yeah,
however,
look, I will stop you there, Ertugrul, because that's a whole other thing. If we start getting into President Assad as well, that's a whole other thing. And I have run out of time. I have run out of time. So I'd like to thank all of you, Galip, Dalay, Ertugrul Kurkcu and Berkay Mandiraci. Mandiraci, for joining us for this discussion today. And thank you, our viewers, for watching. As always, you can leave your comments on our program page at aljazeera.com. You can post your views to facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can tweet us at AJ Inside Story as well. I'm Kamahl Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon.